Hello everybody, I hope you're all having an amazing day. We're doing another lesson today and we're going to be covering something I've been putting off for a while. Something that I've seen a lot of people ask about in like forums and things and other people's videos. And the question is, how do you improve your middle game? And it's a very hard question to answer, and it's actually something I struggled with myself around the 1400 to 1500 elo range. And it's not a particularly easy question to answer either. It's quite convoluted and there are a lot of different answers people have. But personally, I think it all comes down to making a plan. So this video is going to be covering how to make a plan and how to identify things in order to help you make a plan in the middle game. So I've tried to boil it down to about 10 different points that I think you can immediately start implementing into your game to help you get better at making a plan and therefore get better at playing a middle game. So I hope you all enjoy. I hope you all learn something. Let's get cracking with the first one. So the first point in my list is going to be the one that takes priority over everything else, and it's going to be tactics. Middle games are full of tactics, and they can be the difference between winning or losing a game. What are tactics? Tactics are something that wins you something. Now that can either be something big like a queen or even a checkmating pattern, but it can be something even as small as a positional advantage or a tiny pawn. So this little example here I've set up is from a game I played against a young lad at a club, really talented young player. I have the black pieces, he has the white. His last move was knight h4. Knight h4 is a bit of a strange move. You're putting your knight on the edge of the board. I'm not particularly sure why. It's unguarded as well. So, I go ahead and play e5. Now, e5 admittedly isn't the best move, and it loses a lot of black's advantage. But the whole idea is on e5, I'm looking to break in the center. I like open positions, especially with the bishop pair as well. And I'm also releasing an attack on the knight. Now, what does white do here? So, their knight is under attack and so is their pawn. The computer is suggesting knight to f3. Yes, you are losing a move that you've just played, but you are covering all your bases regarding this pawn. However, white decided to go and play g3. Now, there is a tactic here for white. It's a small one, admittedly, but it's still a tactic. And it's something that gives me a clear path to winning this middle game and winning this game. So I'll give you all a second to find it. It's black to play. And the plan is to go bishop c4. Now, what is the idea with bishop to c4? Bishop to c4 is hitting the rook. As well as that, it's opening up the queen to win this pawn. Now, what's white going to do? You can either let me take this rook or hold on to your pawn. Apparently the computer wants to hold on to the pawn with a d takes e4, but no one's really going to do that. So the human move is to go rook e1. At which point you can count my attackers on the pawn. I've got 3 attackers versus their 2 defenders, so I'm going to win this pawn. I just go ahead and take, and again now it's flipped over. I have 2 defenders versus their 2 defenders, so they're not able to win the pawn back. They have to move the bishop wherever they move it, and I can play like a c5. Once that's supported, I can get a potential attack on the king, and I'm up a pawn, especially even if I wanted to trade everything off and try win the pawn up endgame. That's a very real possibility as well. So you can see how me going up this one pawn through this little tactic here is enough to get out of this sort of boring, quote-unquote boring middle game position where not much is happening into a completely winning position where I have a clear plan to victory. So that's just about the importance of tactics. If you want to look for tactics in your game, have a look at all the basic things. Things like pins, forks, skewers, x-rays. If you're in doubt about something, try potentially create a tactic yourself. Try force a tactic, potentially like a pin or something. If there's no good moves, try pin something. And the whole point of that is you want to try and make life hard for your opponent. You want to get them walking on eggshells. You want them so one wrong slip-up's going to be the end of their game. You want to make life hard for them. And it's dirty, it's tricky, you're going to be laying traps, but that's part of the game. They are not your friend, they are your opponent. You want to make life hard for them. Anyway, that's tactics covered. On to the next one. So the next point we have, in order to make a plan, you should be looking for weaknesses in your opponent's position. Now, again, this is one of my games I played in a rapid play tournament. I'm with the white pieces, my opponent's got the black pieces, and I've just moved to e5. Now, what e5 is doing, it's a nice looking move. It's not particularly doing anything right at the minute. It's hitting this light squared bishop, but to be honest, I'd rather have the knight here than this bishop. But the point is, black's next move, they go ahead and play f6. Now, f6 looks okay. It looks like you're straight away kicking this knight. However, they have created some inherent weaknesses in their position with these 3 light squares here. Especially with their bishop trapped on the other side of the board and a few of their pieces not developed, it's going to be really easy for me to infiltrate. So if you can find the position here, it's white to play, see what you can find. So the move is queen to h5. Absolutely beautiful move. I was so proud I found this. Now, the question is, what does white do if they take this? If they take, you have this little series of checks that lead to a checkmate. So it's a pretty simple one, little series of mates. The question is, g6 is an option as well, at which point you actually sacrifice the knight. And the best move is f5. If they decide to take, it's going to be a checkmate again, pretty shortly. So what happened in the game? In the game, they decided to play f5, locking out my light squared bishop again. At which point we actually just win a piece here. With queen to f7, check. The king has to move to h8. We pick up this bishop. Now, black carried on, tried to keep the queens on the board here, which turned out not particularly nice for them. They went queen h4. Now again, if you can find the move here, I'll be very, very impressed. I managed to find it in the game, so I am super proud of it. I'll give you a second. The move is actually bishop to g5. What? Sacrificing another piece for nothing, it seems like. If the queen takes, unfortunately, you have this really nasty fork on the king and the queen, so it's tactically defended. And if the queen tries to move away, you have this bishop to e2, and actually the queen is completely boxed in here. They still can't take this bishop because of the same tactic, and things aren't looking too hot for black. So, how do you look for weaknesses in your opponent's position? Look for pieces that aren't doing anything. Generally, it's going to be bishops. So you'll find often that with weaknesses, they're on a specific color. Because pawns like to be in a chain, the weaknesses tend to be on one color or another. Look for colors that are potentially weak. Look for tactics. Again, tactics, all these points link into each other. So look for colored weaknesses. Look for pieces that aren't doing anything. And just try probe them. Try ask questions of your opponents. See what their responses are. If you can make them make weaknesses, that's always going to be an amazing thing for you. Especially pawn pushes. There's a nice saying that every pawn push incites a weakness, and I think that's so true. And it's really nice when you can make pawn moves that create weaknesses in their position. But anyway, that's weaknesses covered. On to point number 3. Point number 3 is going to be imbalances. Now, what do you mean by imbalances, Jacob? Imbalances are anything that's different between your position and your opponent's. Now, this could be something like something big, like a queen for 2 rooks, or it could be something small, like a knight for a bishop, or even a difference in pawn structure, to be honest. So, admittedly, we have gone away from my games. We're on to more sophisticated games, we'll say, because admittedly, imbalances are a very hard thing to master, and it's something I'm still getting to grips with personally. So, we've got a Bobby Fischer versus Brent Larson here. Bobby Fischer's with the white pieces and Brent Larson's with the black. And this is a beautiful example of an exchange sacrifice that completely wins the game. And what we mean by an exchange sacrifice is trading off a minor piece for a rook. So that's going to be a bishop or a knight for a rook. And this is generally considered not the best. After all, rooks are worth 5 points and knights and bishops are worth 3 points. So it's not an ideal trade, but in the right circumstances, it can be devastating for your opponent. So, Bobby Fischer's just played knight to e4, offering up a trade of knights. They accept and the queen takes. Bishop e6, offering up a trade of bishops as well. Rook f3, looking to potentially take with the rook or even double up with an attack on the king. Queen c6, offering up a trade of queens, and you can see this is a pretty boring position. Yes, black potentially has some weaknesses, and white has slightly stronger pieces, but the position's generally sort of balanced, and nothing crazy is happening. Bobby Fischer decides to go rook e1, potentially looking for takes with some threats on the dark squared bishop. And then the queen trade happens, and white's rooks are very active in this position. d5 is a super interesting move. You're stopping the bishop trade now, and you're hitting white's rook again. So what does white do here? They go rook to g3, which is absolutely insane. Your rook's under attack, so you decide to move the other rook. Now this comes with an immediate tactic of rook takes g7. We can see that if they decide to take this rook here, rook takes, and then you have this little windmill of repetitive checks, where you can go and gobble up every single one of black's pieces. But being grandmasters, they're not going to fall for that. So black decides to play g6, stopping any repetition windmill checks. Now this rook is still under attack. So what's Bobby Fischer going to do here? I'll give you a minute to try to find out. Figure it out yourself. It's white to play. Bobby Fischer decides to take the pawn with the bishop. And now this is absolutely a beautiful move. If they take the bishop, you take their dark squared bishop. Now you're in an opposite coloured endgame. And you're on even pawn. So it's likely to be a draw. Black decides to play this really cool move actually. Now, bishop to d6, counter-attacking on white's g3 rook. And the bishop is still hanging at this point as well. Here, white plays another absolutely insane move. Rather than taking the bishop with the bishop, they decide to sacrifice the exchange and take the bishop with the rook, which is insane to me. Insane that someone could even consider this as a move. So if they decide to take with the f pawn, you take back with check, and now you're able to free up this rook. However, black is a grandmaster and one of the best players in history, so they decide to take this rook instead, looking to trade off up the exchange basically. So now this rook's hanging, but this bishop's also hanging. So both players could potentially save their pieces. So white decides to save their rook and go to e7, looking for this b7 pawn, potentially looking for this f7 pawn as well. So rook e7. Now black decides to go to bishop to d6, hit this rook again, and let them take the b7 pawn because the bishop was still under attack from this pawn. Now, it's important to note here, this bishop is looking at this rook through this rook as well. And this rook is going to, this pawn's going to be lost either way. So black decides to go rook to c8 and try hit this c pawn as well. c4 is an absolutely beautiful move. The bishop and pawn now defend each other, so this is almost indestructible pawn structure right now. Black goes a5, rook to a7. Again, they can't go to a8 because this light squared bishop's dominating this diagonal. Bishop to c7 tried to save the pawn. White calmly plays a g3. They keep developing their rooks, and you can see with a bit of trickery, a bit of nice play, black's actually forced to sack the exchange back for one pawn. You see here, this is really nice. The bishop's hitting the rook, the bishop through the rook, and the bishop and this rook can't go anywhere to defend it. So they're potentially losing a piece here, but black decides to sack the exchange so they can free up this e4 square, or just take the bishop, I guess. And now, yes, it's not an exchange anymore. Both players have sacked the exchange, so it is more even. But these two pawns here versus the one pawn are going to decide the game. So it keeps going, and this is a beautiful move as well. Black goes to c5 to save the bishop and defend this pawn. But white just calmly takes the a pawn. You can't take this bishop because pawn takes, and the bishop can't take the bishop because this rook would be hanging them. So they just take the rook, and now this is a bishop versus bishop endgame. White is currently 1 pawn up, but after bishop to b2, it's completely even on material. The problem is, this is a really, really dangerous passed pawn that's moments away from promoting, even though it's on the 2nd rank. And white's king is so active, it's actually stopping black from ever controlling the promotion squares. Because if you think about it, this pawn only has 3 dark squares till promotion. It could go to a3, but then you're letting the king get closer. And it's not going to be able to go to c3 or d4 because of the king as well. So this pawn's just completely free for promotion, and you can see that here. They trade off. And this is nice technique as well. White's actually sacrificing this pawn in order to pick up these 3, and it's going to be a pretty swift game over, resignation from Brent Larson. But anyway, imbalances, super complicated. Give it a go. If not, I'm not trying to say like sack the exchange or anything every game, but look for the small imbalances. Look for the difference in pawn structure. Look for the difference between pieces, like is there a light squared bishop versus a dark squared bishop? Is there a bishop for a knight? Things like that, the smaller things. And once you start seeing them, you'll be able to work out how to efficiently match your plan in order to make the most of the imbalances. Anyway, that's imbalances. Onto point, what is it? Point 4. Onto point 4 now. And this one I've put down pawn structures. Now, pawn structures are super interesting. If you want to hear more about them, I made a whole video on pawn structures, all of the most common ones and how to play them properly. And pawn structures are the soul of the game, really. It's what everything else moves about. Because the pawns are absolute fortresses and brick walls, everything has to move around them. So they impact the play on an absolutely like bedrock level. They are the walls and barricades of the board, and nothing can do anything about them. So you need to know how to play around them and what each pawn structure requires you as the player to do. So I've just set up a quick one here, and again, if you are interested in these, I'd highly recommend checking out the video I did on pawn structures. But this is called the isolated queen pawn. 10 guesses why. It's because white has this isolated queen pawn. And this is the most researched and talked about pawn structure because it's the most common. It happens through like basically any d4 line. And it's super important to know how to play against it. So the side with white here, the side with the isolated queen pawn, would like to keep every piece on the board if possible. And they are looking to break on d5 or potentially even try promote this pawn. So they want to keep all their pieces on the board as much as possible in order to try support this d5 push. So the more pieces that get traded off, the more this isolated pawn becomes a weakness. Because if you're left in a king and pawn endgame, kings are really badly affected by tempo. So if you know anything about king and pawn endgames, the king's going to have to go to the side, and then you're letting in the king on the other side. So it's really bad if you have one of these in the endgame. It's not the end of the world, but it's not ideal at all. So as the black side, you basically want to do the opposite of the white side. You want to get this into an endgame as quickly as possible. You want everything traded off, and you want to make sure this isolated pawn stays a weakness. So another way you can do that as well is by keeping a knight on the board and getting a knight to blockade in front of the pawn. The knights are really good at doing this because they can jump around, because they're not affecting any rooks or queens or bishops from defending the pawn as well. They can hop behind that and still cover the pawn really well. So knights are the perfect piece for blockading passed pawns. Not that this is a passed pawn, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. But other than that, black really wants to trade off every single piece on the board and get this into an endgame as soon as possible. So again, you need to know the pawn structures you're playing, and you can do this for all of them, or you can choose specific pawn structures that you're likely to find from the openings you play. And that's another point, just knowing your openings on a deeper level rather than just learning the moves. It's going to help you so much. but especially pawn structure, and knowing where the pawn breaks are. So potentially black even has this e5 pawn break as well, but that's more of an edge case scenario. But knowing the pawn breaks, and I covered all of these in my pawn structure video, you should definitely check it out. But yeah, this is going to help improve your game so much, because like I said, you have to play around the pawns. You can't ignore them, otherwise they're going to be you're going to be dropping pawns left, right, and center. But anyway, that's pawn structures. On to tip number 5. Top tip number 5 is going to be all about development of your pieces. Now, this is such an important thing to talk about, and it seems pretty obvious as well. You've got to develop your pieces. You know, it's in the opening principles. Develop your pieces, but there is a bit more to it than just getting them off the back rank. Because a lot of the times you can still get them off the back rank and they're not doing much in the game. You need to make sure they're actually participating in the game. And if you're struggling to do that, you need to force them to. You know, they're not going to do that on their own. You need to insist that your pieces are a part of the game and not let your opponent tell you otherwise. Because one thing your opponent's going to try to do is stop you having good pieces. You know, that's a surefire way to get a victory. And on the other side as well, you know, if your opponent's not developed, try keep it that way. Try make sure that they're not able to develop in time, so you can make the most of your position. But anyway, this is just a quick example, and I know this is opening theory, but I just felt it was a really cool example on why development is so important. Now, this is from the Smith-Morra, and it's interesting as well why I've chosen a gambit. A lot of gambits work because you're so much more developed than your opponent. Because you can get your pieces out faster at the cost of material, so you can launch a quick attack. And the Smith-Morra comes from the Sicilian. After d4 straight away, and then c3, you're able to take this pawn with your knight and get developed as well. So, after that, knight c6, knight f3. Now they can play either e6 or d6 here. Either way, bishop c4, and then knight f6. Now here you've got 3 pieces versus black's 2 pieces. This bishop could technically be counted as developed as well, and you've got a free line for your queen. Your king's 1 move away from castling, with your rook coming out next move as well. So white's really developed here. Now, how does white make the most of this developmental advantage? They go ahead and play e5. Now what's e5 doing? It's looking to trade off the pawns and even trade off the queens if possible, and it's going after this f6 knight as well. So if they try to ignore this, I think the best move in the position is actually knight to g4. Stopping your knight, the worst thing you could possibly do is put your knight back on g8. You know, then you've spent 2 moves doing absolutely nothing. Knight g4 is the best move, hitting the pawn again and not letting yourself get kicked about anymore. If they decide to take with the knight, I take back what I said. This is probably the worst thing you can do, because knight takes, and after pawn takes, you have this sneaky move, bishop takes f7. The king can't actually go anywhere, so they have to take this, at which point you're free to take the queen. It's very similar to this, the intercontinental ballistic missile attack out of the Tennyson Gambit. But anyway, d takes e5. And here white trades off the queen, and you can take with the king. I think that's probably the safest option. But if you decide to take with the knight here, there's this really tricky series, knight b5, and you're threatening the fork with devastating results, I guess. And then, so if white decides to stop that happening with king d7, it's actually mating 2 here. You can try find it. It's pretty easy. Knight takes e5. All of these are covered. The king has to go back, at which point knight to c7 is actually a smothered mate. So, I know this is not technically middle game stuff, but it just shows the importance of developing, and especially as well, stopping your opponent developing with e5 as well. So, keep in mind, make sure your pieces are developed, and if they're not, insist that they are and work towards getting them developed, because no one else is going to do it but you. You know, you're the master of your own position. You're the only one that can do it. So anyway, that's development. On to the next one. So the next tip I have for you guys sort of links into the last one of development, and it's going to be all about activity. Now, what do I mean by activity? It's easy to say your pieces are good when they look good, when they look like they're doing stuff, but in reality, that's not quite the case. They actually need to be doing a job, and they can't just be sitting there looking pretty. So, I've brought up an example here of a move I played in the local league against the 1741. I have the black pieces, and here I just doubled up my rooks, looking to sort of attack on this backwards pawn. They go ahead and play g3 to stop any sort of sacrifice on f4, and this is where the move is. So I was really happy with this move. I found it through thinking about activity and making sure my pieces are doing things. Because g3 is a really annoying move, and it's potentially locking up this pawn structure forever. So I'll give you a minute to find it. The move is h4. Now, what's h4 doing? It's breaking up white's pawn structure here by potentially even forcing a g4 or a takes. Obviously, if they take this, I'm free to take this. If they allow us to take e3 with check and king takes, they're allowing us to take e3 with check as well, which is absolutely devastating for white. So, if they decide to take, my argument here is that they have long-term pawn structure damage with the double h pawns. We can either get this 8th rook in, we can get the bishop on e7, or we could potentially even bring this rook back to e6 with h6. The cooler idea, though, I think, is what happens if they play g4. Now, there is a follow-up here that I also saw, which is really cool. You can go again and sacrifice another pawn with g5. Now, what happens if they take here or if they push? It's basically the same thing. We'll say they push. We have this bishop to g3, supported by the pawn on h4, skewering the king and the rook. So you're winning position there. After g5, they decide to ignore it and go rook to d1. Here we just take this pawn, and we are actually just winning a pawn here with bishop takes. So, playing actively won us a pawn in this situation. White already had a weak position with this backwards pawn, and we played actively. We insisted that this bishop was doing something. We insisted that they couldn't have this pawn structure, and we managed to get a good position. I ended up winning this game. So, it shows you the power of playing actively and making sure your pieces are actually doing something rather than just looking pretty. Anyway, on to the next one. So, tip number 7 is going to be about patience. You have to learn patience, especially in the middle game. Do not rush anything when you're not ready to. Focus on development. Focus on getting your pieces active. If you rush things, it's not going to turn out well for you. So, I have an example from one of my games where I did a really bad case of not having patience and rushed into an attack that completely backfired. So this is against one of my friends, very strong player, and I should have known better. So we start off with the French. They played d5. I decide to take for some reason. I've never played this, and go d4 into a weird, I'm not sure what the opening is, exchange French, I guess. Not quite sure. We both develop our bishops out. I castle. He plays knight c6. I play c3 to lock up that pawn structure. And then they castles. And here you just saw, I thought there was some sort of Greek gift, and decided to take on h7. Boy, was I wrong. This has gone down from a slightly better position for white with 0.3 all the way down to minus 3.5, the computer's saying. So I'm straight down a piece with a bit extra. And you can see how I was desperate to win. I didn't want to play a long game. I rushed the attack. What is that? 1, 2, 3, 4 of our pieces haven't moved. I don't think you could even count this rook as moving, to be honest. So maybe even 5 of our pieces haven't moved. And I decided to go for a sacrifice, which is absolutely stupid and bonkers. And I deserve to lose. But it shows you the importance of being patient. Attacks aren't just going to happen. Your opponent's not going to let you just get an attack off. You're going to have to work towards it and make sure your pieces are doing the utmost things and making sure they're active and dangerous, and making genuine threats before you actually launch a proper attack. But anyway, don't be like me. Be smart. Take it slow. Make sure your pieces are actually doing things before you go for an attack. Anyway, on to tip number 8. Tip number 8 I have for you guys is going to be about key squares. Now, what are key squares? It's hard to say. It is hard to say. You sort of know it when you see it. And I hate to say that, but you just sort of know it where you see it. So, what are the key squares in this position? Well, firstly, I think it's important to note the imbalances, actually. It's pretty even, you know, both it's evenish pawn structure. You have a difference with these two pawns, but they both leave holes on the d5 and e5 square for both players. And you both have 2 rooks, you both have a queen. So the main difference here is the knight versus the bishop. Now, what else is important is that the bishop's on the same colour as the pawns, while this knight is free to roam around wherever it really wants to. So, what do you do here? You look for the weak squares as white, you know. There's not a clear pawn push, so you've got to make the use of your pieces. And again, it's playing actively in developing your pieces, making the most out of them. And you go for the weak squares. Not the weak squares, the key squares. I guess they are sort of weak as well. You go for the key squares. We know especially knights are super powerful on outposts. So if we can try find an outpost as well, that's going to be super nice. So where are the key squares in this position? I would argue the key squares are here and here. You could make a case that this is a key square as well. But if you think about it, there's not many places you can actually go to get into this square as white. So I'm going to take this off the list. And if you look as well at how you get into the key squares, you can sort of get secondary key squares as well, which are really good to control. And those will be this one, and this one, because that's how you get into these 2 key squares here. So now we know that. What's the quickest way we can get the knight into these key squares? We'll go to knight d3. Let's say they shuffle a bit. We get the knight on f3, which is one of our secondary key squares. Black's forced to almost shuffle, and then we can get into either one of them, and this knight's going to be absolutely devastating for black. So, what do you do in your games? Because this is obviously an extreme example. There are going to be key squares. They might not be as obvious as this one. Try to identify them the best you can, and try to make sure your pieces are actually attacking or defending or controlling those squares regardless of the cost. You know, it's going to be super important if you can get one of those key squares. A lot of the time the key squares line up with pawn breaks because they are going to be in gaps in the pawn structure, you know, like pawns go on diagonals or zigzags. If they're not, there's going to be a key square there, so you can try look for them that way. But generally, you sort of know them when you see them. So I hope this helps. Please do try get your pieces active on key squares. And again, it's activity, you know, making sure your pieces are doing the most. So again, we can have a look at this one. Like, which of these key squares are more important? They're both extremely nice squares. I would argue that this e6 square is going to be better if you can get it there, because of the activity on the rooks and the proximity to the king. You potentially have some pawn pushes with control over some of the king squares. Anyway, that's a little tangent. Look for the key squares. You know, you're going to find them, and you will get better at finding them as you start to consciously make an effort to do so, I guess. On to tip number 9. Tip number 9 is going to be about king safety. Now, king safety is an interesting one because it's not always obvious on the board, you know. And this is actually one of the ones where you have to use your imagination a bit. You have to think about what could potentially happen in the future. Sometimes it might be more obvious, like if the king has inherent weaknesses around the king. Again, looking at the weak squares, looking at the pawn structure, looking at the imbalances, they all link together. But some of the times, like this example, you might know it from your opening theory. You know, you might know the general plan of an opening. Like this one's the King's Indian Defense, which is famous for its reckless kingside attack. So you know that there is going to be potential for a king attack here. And you've got to think about king safety not only in your opponent's safety, but your safety as well. is there potential for your opponent to attack you? And then you have to actively deal with that. You know, you can't let them come to you willingly. You've got to put up a fight and stop them getting that free attack in. So anyway, this is just an example from one of my games. I'm with the black pieces, playing a pretty standard King's Indian defense, and we'll just go through it. I get the usual f4, f5 attack off. I get the rook to f7. Now f7's looking to get to g7 or h7 and look for these potentially open files. And again, it's using your imagination. These files could potentially open up, and doing a move like rook to f7, if these files open up, this rook could be deadly against the white king. We keep going, usual stuff. And you see how these files have opened up, and this rook on f7 is not looking so silly anymore. We push the g5 pawn, get the knights out, trade off, the knights come in. Again, this rook on f7 is doing the Lord's work, because we saw the potential of a king attack. We saw that, hold on, maybe white's king isn't as safe as it looks. And there's potential of an attack here, and we keep going, and eventually it is mating with this nice rook to g4 here. Almost a mate. The knight can take this rook, but then, you know, queen g2 mate. So this is a tough one to see. It's a tough one to see, and I hate to say it, but a lot of the time this comes from experience. Messing up positions and learning from that bad game, you know, learning from that blunder, whatever, and learning what does and doesn't work. And yes, you can find this in books, but nothing's going to be better than feeling absolutely horrible after a game because you messed something up and insisting that you never make that one mistake again. But yeah, you have to use your imagination a bit with this one. It's tricky, and it's, you know, if chess was easy, everyone would be a grandmaster, you know, but chess isn't easy. So you're gonna have to work on this one. But I guarantee, you know, having that danger sense is immeasurably good for you, you know, and it will improve your chess so much. But anyway, on to the last point. So the last point we have in our middle game video here is going to be about flexibility. You know, I say you have to have a plan, and that is very true. But you also have to be ready to abandon that plan if things don't work out. You know, if your opponent makes moves you're not anticipating, or the position change, the pawn structure changes, you have to be ready to abandon that plan and make a new one. You have to play what the position demands and not what you want to play. You know, if you only played what you want to play, you wouldn't particularly improve. You have to do what the position asks of you. And this is a really good example of that. This is in a recent game I played against a lad at my club, really strong player again. And it's a great example of me being too stubborn to change my plan. So the knight's gonna come back here and attack this e4 pawn. But I have this cool move, f5. Now the computer's actually asking for f6, but anyway. I play f5 here, hitting the queen and supporting this pawn as well. And the queen goes back to g3. Now this is a really strong diagonal for their queen and bishop. And they're potentially looking to play like a h4, h5. And infiltrate on my weak dark squares. Again, we talk about weaknesses. I've got inherent weak dark squares around my king, and white's trying to make the most of that. But anyway, I have this idea, and it's become part of my plan. I want to get this bishop on c7 and annoy the hell out of white and their double bishop and queen. So how do I do that? I play rook c7. Not only is this doing this, but it's also potentially stopping any c4 push as well. So I play c7 to prepare this bishop to c7. And the whole reason I want to do this is to trade off the dark squared bishop, because I have these weaknesses around my king. So after a few moves, I move the queen off, which potentially isn't ideal because I'm no longer covering the c7 square. But this pin on my bishop's a bit scary. So I decide to move it off and move my rook up to f7 instead eventually. Now, you just saw there, they moved to d4. Now, what's this doing? The computer's saying this is slightly better for me. And the reason is because bishop takes bishop. If they take there, this bishop's super solid. And if they take this way, f4 is super scary for white. So this is a bit of a mistake from white, and the computer saying I just take. Now, my plan was actually to trade off the dark squared bishop, but I'm too stubborn and set in my ways, and I decide to actually just go back to c7, because that's my plan. You know, my plan was to go bishop to c7. Now, what was the reason for my plan? The reason for my plan was that I wanted to trade off the dark squared bishop. So why did I not just trade off the dark squared bishop when I was given the opportunity in a way that benefit me as well? And to be honest, the answer is I don't know. And to be honest, this didn't even cross my mind as a move that I could do, because I was so stubborn and set in my ways that I needed to play this bishop to c7. And this just lets them come back, fix their mistake, and things are nice again for white. So, you know, don't be too set in your ways. Be adaptable. Be ready to change your plan when you have the opportunity to and when the position demands it. And don't be like me. Don't be too stubborn. Don't be too set in your ways. Be flexible. Be ready to change. Anyway, that's all 10 points. That is all 10 points. I hope you all learned something. Please do try this. You know, it's easy for me to sit here and say, you know, this is what you need to do. This is exactly this. But in reality, chess is a hard game. You know, chess is a very hard game, and when you're playing a game, especially like a classical one, there are so many things going through your head. It's not easy to be one mind focusing on the game, one mind focusing on things you need to do to improve. You know, it's not as easy as that. So go easy on yourself. You know, go easy on yourself. Just try to be aware of these things and try your best. You know, try your best. That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking. Try your best. Give it a go. If you don't like it, don't do it. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all learned something. I hope this video made you think of something that could help you improve your game. And I hope you get to a point in your chess where you're happier, especially in the middle game, because no one really likes the middle game. You know, I don't like the middle game. Everyone wants to study openings and all that. I personally want to study end games, but middle games are a part of the game, so you have to. And it's not easy. It's not easy to improve at middle games, other than just playing. Just play the game, enjoy the game, have fun. But anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Please like if you liked. Please subscribe if you really liked. And I'll catch you guys all tomorrow. Bye-bye.